that being said, where does the OK Boomer meme phenomenon come from? Why does it blow up?
Okay, I'll go off now for a little bit, and at any point you want to stop me or whatever, just let me know. So it really blew up. It's not that old of a phenomena. It seems like a million years ago, but because COVID has sort of distorted our time and how we experience time, it was just the closing months of 2019, and all of a sudden, it was a few really important things. One of them was this video that blew up on, I think, TikTok, where there was an older guy, perhaps a baby boomer, going on a long-winded rant about what he called Peter Pan syndrome, which is young people never want to grow up, take responsibility, blah, 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 Peter Pan syndrome. And this was a guy ranting. And then on the sidebar of the TikTok video, which I think was the actual content creator, was a much younger person who, in response to that, held up this big paper that said, "Okay, Boomer." Just flip dismissal of it. And that became really popular. And then there were one or two other things. There was that, and then there was what became known as the OK Boomer girl on TikTok and Twitter, which was a young woman wearing a Bernie Sanders campaign t-shirt, dancing around singing a song that came out to tribute OK Boomer. It was called, I think, Okie Dokie Boomer, and that probably has so many views on YouTube. The TikTok dancing boomer girl, the video, if you check, I checked today just to see where I was at, it has over 54 million views with over 248,000 likes and over 26,000 retweets. So it's been big, it's been popular. So that's how it sort of grabbed the mainstream discussion. And as you guys surely know, predating the OK Boomer stuff was the old like millennials have too much avocado toast, can't buy houses type that in fact is certainly why I'm living in a small apartment and cannot have a house right now, is only because I buy too many avocados. They're so great. California has so many avocados, and I splurge, and that's why I'm living in a tiny apartment instead of a house.
My daughter came to Mexico to visit me, and the first thing she asked for was avocado. I'm being totally serious. My 23-year-old daughter wanted avocado toast.
I've never tasted avocado toast in my life. I have an avocado tree in my backyard. I don't want to make avocado toast. But Professor Mueller, can you define boomers for our chat and our audience who keeps asking a question that they probably know the answer to anyway? But
yeah, okay. In order to make sure I give the most specific definition as possible, I will give you the exact years so everybody's on the same page. And I'm bringing it up right now as we speak so I don't mess it up. So, right, a baby boomer would be someone born between 1946 to 1964. That's the approximate age range for it. So when we're talking about boomers, we're talking about people who are sort of near retirement age right now from the workforce.
Basically, the concept of baby boomer is a consequence of the fact that after World War II, there was a massive increase in births, obviously probably because of the incoming or returning soldiers from the war. That was a baby boom, and that generation are considered baby boomers. Would that be correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent. So the first question I have, right, is the OK Boomer phenomenon rooted in a certain material, real world politics that conflicts the digital generation of millennials with who would, I would say, be their parents, depending on age? Is there a materiality to this discourse, riff, beef? And if so, can you elaborate on it?
Well, in an answer that will surely satisfy no one, the answer is yes and no. So to give it the benefit of the doubt, right, So realistically speaking, right about now, if you look at like, you'll find a lot of articles online that'll talk about what's sort of called the great generational wealth transfer that's about to happen right now.
We did a whole show on that with Billy Mintz.
Okay, right. So people now transferring wealth from the boomers to younger generations, allegedly, right? And it's from what economists and other observers talk about, right? It's supposed to be the biggest transfer of wealth, quote, in history, whatever that means, right? But if you take a look at, of course, the statistics on that, there's class characteristics absolutely within that, right? So there's some good studies by the Federal Reserve, I think from like 2019 or so. And they talk about basically that the overwhelming majority of the wealth being transferred, as people listening to this might guess who are more critically oriented in their social analysis, that there's a small sliver of people within baby boomers who have about, let's say, 40% of the wealth that make up only about, I think, like 2% of the raw number of transfers, but it's a huge glut of the wealth being transferred. So it's a cross-class bourgeoisie transfer of wealth masquerading. Without analyzing those statistics, you might just say, oh yeah, old people have a lot of wealth and younger people don't. And maybe that's going to get evened out now with a transfer of wealth. But of course, there's class characteristics to it that really don't get discussed unless you go looking for the statistics yourself, or if you're so inclined to do an economic analysis versus a generation analysis. Mm-hmm. In terms of there being some reality to, say, the cultural component of people using the term, I would say that there's something that was picked up on, I think, so when this sort of first became popular, Bhaskar Sankara from Jacobin wrote a pretty popular essay in The Guardian about the boomer phenomena. And he was quite dismissive of it and said, this is just an ultra online middle class phenomena, and it's lacking a class analysis, which is correct, right? Using the sort of dismissing boomers as the enemy is sort of a superficial non-class based analysis. But, some of the stuff that I wrote on it tries to take it a step further from the class analysis to talk about culture and take the cultural component serious in its own right.
How much do you think the OK Boomer discourse is rooted in the generational fracture that occurs and is still occurring in the Democratic Party around who supported Hillary and who supported Bernie?
Well, that's hard to say, because the OK Boomer girl got real popular with a Bernie Sanders t-shirt on, but however, how representative that is of the Bernie versus
Donald Trump or Joe Biden,
or that was, yeah, well, I guess Hillary predates that video, but the larger sentiment, I don't especially think people using the phrase online or in real life, as many people have probably heard it in real life, not just online. I don't necessarily think there's that clear of a analysis, and I think it's sort of ironically or cynically gets used as a toss-off phrase that functions as this sort of fetishist disavowal, right? Like, you don't have to take a political class analysis seriously. The world has a disaster, grave climate catastrophe on the horizon, class exploitation at unprecedented levels. But rather than taking the time to seriously analyze it, even in like a normie social democrat Bernie Sanders way, you sort of just like, oh, haha, it's the boomers. And then if you challenge someone who says that, they might be like, oh, I know it's really not boomers. I know actually it's more nuanced than that. But then it's like, okay, well then why is the joke so potent in the first place? Like, there is a larger question to be asked, because the year that this became popular, which was just the end of 2019, it ended up being, what is a boomer? And right, this term of baby boomer has been around forever as a generational term. The Google search, what is a boomer, was the fourth most search of all of 2019 in the United States on Google. So it obviously struck a chord more than like the million other memes and jokes that circulate on social media every day. There is something specific to this that somehow drew people in. And despite cynically saying, "Oh, I don't actually believe in it, but I'm going to say it anyway and blame boomers," there's there's something more to the picture, I think, which deals with the lack of planning for a future that's not a disaster for people that are young and older.
Well, let me ask you this question. Why the boomer generation, not Generation X? Does it just not have the same ring to it?
Well, isn't Generation X largely just ignored in most political analysis anyway? They're sort of the forgotten generation in discussions. Maybe I'm wrong. Just maybe I've missed it.
I think the boomer generation is still holding on to a certain amount of power in federal positions, right? But if you think about a lot of the mayors and police chiefs and district attorneys, they're all coming out of Generation X. Governors, not all, but a lot of the ones, especially the ones making a lot of the most noise. And this is bipartisan.
Supreme Court nominees.
It's something. What's the vice president's name? Can't think of her name.
Kamala Harris.
Yeah, isn't she a Gen Xer?
She's like 3 years old. That's a very good question. What year was Kamala Harris born?
She's on the verge. She's like on the cusp. Like I'm a cusp.
Is like 3 or 4 years older than I am.
There's a lot to be said about the apolitical nature of the Generation X because most of us are growing up in an era that is very, anti-politic. But that being said, I do think, I've written about it, not like you, Mr. Smart Guy, Jason, but I definitely have written and done some video essays, and a lot of my work actually is on that era because I do think there is something to be said politically of this quote unquote anti-politics.
I disagree with some of our more dedicated Marxoid comrades and friends who are like, "Oh, generational analysis is poo-poo." I don't think it's poo-poo at all. I think that your time in terms of when you live in a space and time and what you intake in terms of literature, media, consumption, music, art, political realities shapes your worldview. And it's not accidental to me why Generation X has the politics that it is. I am Generation X, right? Mm-hmm. I was born in the late 60s. I know why Generation X is more apolitical. I know why Generation X is very cynical. And I know why Generation X really doesn't have a significant political character. It's because if you look at Generation X, and what people don't really realize is that baby boomers have all this wealth. And they say millennials have no wealth, but no one ever asks what's the situation of Generation X. Because a lot of people don't know, because they weren't old enough to know, that Generation X had the same pejoratives that are said about millennials now in the 90s. Get out of your parents' house, get a job.
Did you ever watch Mr. Show, Jason? David Cross?
No.
There's a Mr. Show sketch from the 90s that actually speaks to everything Pascal is talking about. Another thing people don't talk about with Generation X that is a huge demarcating line is that there was a lot of wealth creation through the private sector. So unlike the previous generation that comes up through government largesse, you're talking about people growing up in a generation of a lot of deregulation. So from the late 70s, at the end of the Carter administration, we start to see some financial deregulation, and then it really ramps up with Reagan, and then Clinton kind of doubles down on that by erasing Glass-Steagall by the end of his two-term presidency. A lot of that deregulation that happened, a lot of wealth was grown, especially in like the Black community, with the ability to buy homes. Now, of course, we know all that was lost, or a lot of it was lost. I won't say all of it was lost in 2008. But I do think there's a reason for a lot of the apolitical nature of that time frame.
And a lot of people fail to realize, there's tons of Generation X people that are still burdened down with student loan debt.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think some of the issues like student loans do bolster some of the arguments that I think I sort of agree with that Pascal is saying, which is like there are certain features that just based on the structure of the political economy, of the shift of the American political economy, do disproportionately burden people born or impacted at certain times in history. But I guess what I'm trying to figure out then and think through is, right, I agree with a lot of the arguments on like the movement of anti-politics and post-politics, like the stuff from the BungaCast book, which I know you guys have talked about. And they touch upon that generation wars really briefly in their book too. And I think that's a pretty solid book that they wrote. But right, the question I think we should be trying to figure out is like, the switch from like the 1990s anarchist flavored politics, anti-state, all that stuff, that's pretty well documented. But what we have to figure out is why is there still no real political momentum 30 years later for anyone that's grown up since the Gen X were younger, getting politically active? I mean, sure, there are big like showing up to a protest event numbers, but that doesn't mean anything in material change in any real way, nor does it mean people have a coherent ideology whatsoever, which is what I'm trying to get at. And when you don't have a coherent political ideology or some form of a class discussion, then you probably fall back on generation wars discourse or something like that.
Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to hit like and subscribe on your way out. You can catch the live stream of This Is Revolution every Tuesday through Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific Time and Saturday, 9 a.m. Pacific Time. This is Revolution.